There's a story of two unlikely lovers who barely escape a terrible war. It is 1755. The French and their Indian allies are burning out American settlers who have been pushing into disputed territory along the Canadian frontier. A French soldier describes what happened to one American prisoner.
The Indians had burned an entire settlement of 55 families. One of the 10 prisoners was a young girl named Rachel, born in Virginia of poor parents. Rachel was made to run the gauntlet by the Indians when she reached the fort and almost lost an eye from the blow she suffered.
For the Indians, this was a merciless war for survival, but they let Rachel live.
It took her a month to recover. As she was lovely and sweet, she won without effort the heart of a Canadian who wished to make her his wife. The Indians answered, "We scorn the Frenchman who was cowardly enough to ally with his enemy."
The American girl and her Canadian lover could be killed if they remained here. So the French disguise them and send them on a desperate journey to Louisiana, 1,000 miles away.
Bonne chance et courage.
Their chances of survival are minimal. But the story ends with these unexpected words.
3 months later, news came of their safe arrival at New Orleans.
Two escape the war about to engulf the continent, but thousands of others won't. A war is coming that will change the world. It will be fought on every ocean on Earth, with the 5 greatest navies that ever set sail, and the largest armies in the history of mankind. The 7 Years' War will change the destiny of Canada. Large imperial armies will march on her soil, bombard her capital, and burn her villages and towns. Empires will fight each other for possession of the continent. Indian nations will go to war for their homelands. In 1 decade of destruction, the future of everyone on this continent will be transformed forever. The publisher of the Pennsylvania Gazette has a vision of North America's future. 1 language, 1 religion, 1 nation, English and Protestant. There are 1 million people in the American colonies, and Benjamin Franklin is convinced they will grow to dominate the continent.
The million doubling suppose but once in 25 years will, in another century, be more than the people of England, and the greatest number of Englishmen will be on this side of the water.
British America is a ribbon of 14 prosperous colonies stretching from Halifax to Savannah. Its cities are thriving, its population steadily growing. There is only one direction to expand, over the mountains into the Indian homelands and the land claimed by the French as Canada. Thousands of settlers are streaming into the richest part of the interior, the Ohio Valley. Anger is spreading among the Indian nations.
We have great reason to believe you intend to drive us away and settle the country. Or else why do you come and fight in the land God has given us?
Their fears are well-founded. Benjamin Franklin's press is fueling the urge for expansion into the Ohio Valley. Everyone wants part of it. But in the summer of 1755, the American push is crushed by the Indians and the French. Benjamin Franklin sees no future for English America unless the French are eliminated.
The French will set the Indians to harass our frontiers, kill and scalp our people, and drive in the advanced settlers. And so, preventing our obtaining more subsistence by cultivating new lands, they discourage our marriages and keep our people from increasing. Thus, if the expression may be allowed, killing thousands of our children before they are born.
Canada, the center of everything that threatens American ambition. Just 65,000 people, but they control the interior through a vast system of Indian alliances. Franklin declares that the French must be driven out, now.
The safety and security of all the English colonies in North America, that is, their very being as colonies, make such measure absolutely necessary, and that without any loss of time.
The first victims are not even in Canada, but a peaceful population of French-speaking Acadians in Nova Scotia. The American colonists burn their settlements and ship thousands into exile. Massachusetts Governor William Shirley considers it just the first blow against Canada.
It is happy for us that we have now a fair opportunity offered of ridding the province of its dangerous neighbors. It would be wounding the serpent in the head.
Keep moving, move along. This way.
The battle for the continent has begun. Acadia is burning. The Ohio Valley is a killing ground. But a greater war is brewing across the ocean. A war that will consume empires. A war that will settle the fate of North America. Canada has been rooted here for 150 years. Many families are into their 5th generation. For them, France is a dim memory in stories told by grandfathers. But all of this would change by June of 1756. Europe erupts into war. France and Britain will fight for world dominance in the farthest reaches of their empires. Quebec is now a wartime city. Its streets overflow with French soldiers, Acadian refugees, and native warriors. The Marquis de Vaudreuil is the first Canadian-born governor of the colony. He believes a Canadian should command the French forces here.
War in this country is very different from the wars in Europe. The Canadians and Indians would not march with the same confidence under the order of a commander of the troops from France as they would under the officers of this colony.
But France is not listening. Paris sends the Marquis de Montcalm to command in the North American War. He has a good military record, but little money.
I believe thou must accept an honorable commission, but it would also be a sensitive one, which secures my son's fortune. An important goal for a father, but it was a commission I never asked for, nor desired.
The governor and the general quickly come to detest each other. Montcalm loses no time in showing his opinion of most Canadian officers.
Langy, excellent. Marin, brave, but stupid. The rest are not worth mentioning.
Monsieur de Montcalm is so quick-tempered that he goes to the length of striking the Canadians. How can he restrain his officers when he cannot restrain himself?
Vaudreuil and Montcalm will never agree on how to conduct the war. The Canadians fight Indian style, moving in quick, aggressive raids. In one attack, Vaudreuil sends 300 raiders against the community of German flats in the Mohawk Valley. They kill 50 settlers, take 32 scalps, and 150 women and children as prisoners. Vaudreuil's war is a war of attrition.
It is no longer the time when a few scalps or the burning of a few houses is any advantage or even an object. Petty means, petty ideas, petty counsels about details are now dangerous, and a waste of material and time.
Instead, Montcalm brings European tactics into the wilderness, moving massive siege guns to attack the enemy's strongholds head-on. In 1 year, he has 2 stunning victories. He devastates the British at Fort Oswego. Then he moves south and captures Fort William Henry. In North America, the British are losing forts. But in Europe, the British are losing entire armies. France is winning the war. A powerful minister, William Pitt, advances a new idea. If Britain can't defeat the French in Europe, then beat them in their colonies. A daring twofold plan is conceived. Invade Canada by land from the American colonies. And by sea, send a massive armada against the fortress of Louisbourg. It will be the greatest naval invasion in North American history. On the remote Atlantic coast, the fortress of Louisbourg guards the gateway to Canada. To get to Quebec, it must be destroyed. The invasion of Canada begins here at Louisbourg. The British fleet arrives on June 1st, 1758. 14,000 men strong. One of them, a 31-year-old brigadier obsessed with glory. Days before the war was declared, he wrote to his mother.
All notions of peace are now at an end. We must, however, hope that fortune will favor us, since we do our best to deserve her smiles. Your obedient and affectionate son, James Wolfe.
The British fleet begins to bombard the town. Louisbourg's governor is Augustin de Drucourt. He knows the situation is hopeless, but if he can hold out through the summer, it will be too late for the British to move on to Quebec this year. It is a costly strategy.
It seems that their intention is not only to seriously breach the walls, but above all to kill the residents, and to burn the town.
Out of the devastation, a heroine emerges to sustain the garrison's morale. Every morning, Marianne de Drucourt, the governor's wife, climbs to the ramparts.
This lady has performed such exploits during the siege as must entitle her to rank among the most illustrious of her sex, for she fired 3 cannon every day in order to animate the gunners.
Marianne de Drucourt even acquires a nom de guerre. She is called La Bombardière. The British will have their own hero. James Wolfe leads a reckless assault to get the first British troops ashore. Wolfe establishes a reputation for boldness and daring, but not for mercy. Governor Drucourt asks for help for Louisbourg's wounded.
When the French are in a scrape, they are ready to cry out on behalf of the human species. When fortune favors them, none more bloody, more inhuman. Montcalm has changed the very nature of war and has forced us, in some measure, to a deterring and dreadful vengeance.
After 2 months of bombardment, Drucourt surrenders. He has delayed the British assault on Quebec, for now. James Wolfe will fight no more battles this year. But 1,000 miles away, Montcalm's battles are just beginning. 16,000 British troops are moving north on Lake Champlain, heading toward Fort Carillon. Montcalm is outnumbered 4-1.
I have to deal with a formidable army. Nevertheless, I don't despair. My troops are excellent. From the enemy's movements, I can see that he wavers. If, thanks to his slowness, he gives me time to establish myself, I shall beat them.
Montcalm's confidence is well-founded. As the British begin their assault, French muskets pin them down under withering fire. David Perry, a 17-year-old militiaman from Massachusetts, sees the invasion of Canada crumble around him.
It happened that I got behind a white oak. I lay there some time. A man could not stand erect without being hit, any more than he could stand in a shower without having rain fall upon him.
It is a stunning victory. But Montcalm knows he can't count on the same outcome every time. He needs fresh troops. Montcalm sends an emissary to France to plead for 4,000 soldiers to save Canada.
Can we hope for another miracle to save us? I trust in God. Come what may, His will be done. I await the news from France with impatience and dread.
The answer won't come until spring when the ice breaks in the river. It will be a winter of worrying and waiting. At Versailles, the affairs of powerful men are swayed by Madame de Pompadour. She is the king's mistress. In a court divided by intrigues and plots, she is an important ally for Montcalm's emissary, Louis-Antoine de Bougainville.
Madame de Pompadour showed me the greatest kindness. I often worked with her over the object of my mission. I did not succeed anywhere so well for the common cause as for my personal interest.
Bougainville is promoted and awarded the Cross of Saint-Louis. But Versailles is preoccupied with the war in Europe. The Minister of Marine gives Bougainville his answer.
This minister loved parables and told me very pertinently that one did not try to save the stables when the house was on fire. I then could obtain for these poor stables only 400 recruits and a few munitions.
Bougainville returns to a bleak and hungry Quebec with the bad news from Versailles, and even worse news for Montcalm. One of his daughters has died. Montcalm writes to his wife.
I think I would renounce every honor to join you again. But the king must be obeyed. The moment when I see you once more will be the brightest of my life. Adieu, my heart. I believe that I love you more than ever.
The time for private thoughts is over. Everyone knows that this year the British will come to Quebec. From every parish in the colony, Canadians converge to defend the city. Fathers and sons, old men, and boys as young as 12. "106 extra cannon reinforce the walls. To the east of Quebec, where Montcalm believes an enemy landing is most likely, a vast network of trenches and redoubts is dug, stretching for 10 miles. 15,000 men are now encamped and waiting, but no one can conceive the immensity of what is heading toward them. "22 ships of the line, 27 frigates and sloops of war, 80 transports, more than 200 ships in all, 1/4 of the British Navy." This fleet stretches 100 miles along the St. Lawrence River. In all, there are 9,000 soldiers, 18,000 sailors, more than the entire population of Quebec. But the commander of this invasion force has more the air of an invalid than a warrior. Chronically seasick, suffering from rheumatism and tuberculosis. James Wolfe, now General James Wolfe, is a dying man. He seeks comfort from a favorite poem, and he marks one passage.
The boast of heraldry, the pomp of power, and all that beauty, all that wealth e'er gave, awaits alike the inevitable hour. The paths of glory lead but to the grave.
Aboard HMS Success, Lieutenant John Knox from Sligo, Ireland. He keeps a daily journal of the British invasion of Canada, a country he's seeing for the first time.
We have settlements now on each side of us. The land uncommonly high above the level of the river. And we see large signal fires everywhere before us. The country people on the south shore are removing their effects in carts and conducting them under the escort of armed men to a greater distance.
As the British fleet approaches Quebec, residents begin fleeing the city. Many head for the General Hospital outside the city's walls, where Marie de la Visitation copes as best she can.
Since our house was beyond the range of the enemy artillery fire, the unfortunate people of the town did not hesitate to seek refuge here. All the outbuildings were full. The servants' quarters, the barn, the stable, even the attic was full.
The British fleet anchors off the city on June 26th. But Quebec has a surprise in store. The British land on Ile d'Orléans, facing Quebec, and prepare to launch their attack. But it is Quebec that strikes first. "80 ships and rafts have been chained together and loaded with explosives. Then they are released in the current to float downriver and blow up the anchored British fleet. A mile-wide chain of floating volcanoes bears down on the invaders. It becomes the night John Knox will never forget.
Nothing could be more formidable than these infernal engines were on their first appearance. They were certainly the grandest fireworks that could possibly be conceived. Awful, yet beautiful. Blaze of floating fires, the bursting of the grenades, the crackling of other combustibles, all which reverberated in the air in the adjacent woods. It afforded a scene, I think, infinitely superior to any adequate description.
But the ships have exploded too soon. The British fleet is spared. A citizen watches the fireboats burn uselessly.
The project was beautiful, but badly executed. The English, who at first were dismayed, cried hurrah, and mocked our operations.
Across the river at Levis, the British have entrenched their cannons. The city is waiting. It is the night of Thursday, July 12th. Francois-Joseph de Vienne is watching from his warehouse.
At precisely 9 o'clock in the evening, the enemy sent a rocket from the heights of the Pointe de Lévis.
Abbé Jean-Félix Rocher watches from his church, Notre-Dame des Victoires.
At noon, a bomb fell on the widow Morin's house, set it on fire, and burned it to the ground, as well as the houses of the widow Chainevert, of Monsieur Cardenat, of Monsieur Dacier, of Madame Boisevert.
During one night, 50 of the finest houses in the lower town were destroyed. During this dreadful conflagration, we could offer nothing but tears and prayers at the foot of the altar during such moments as could be snatched away from tending to the wounded.
Gunfire and bombardment terrorized the whole town. The women and children in great numbers near the citadel were continually in tears, wailing and praying. They huddled together and said the rosary.
The siege spreads terror and provokes rage.
A soldier of the Lassar regiment was killed by a bomb. The English were angry that our men worked on our batteries during the truce. It seems they want to impose their laws on us already.
The British are bombarding a nearly deserted city. But for the few civilians left, there's a greater danger than cannonballs.
Famine threatened to reduce us to the last extremity. Upwards of 600 persons from our house and vicinity partaking of our small means of subsistence. The enemy, informed of our destitute condition, was satisfied with battering at our walls, hopeless of trying to vanquish us, except through starvation.
British siege of Quebec lasts 9 weeks. Every morning, every afternoon, every night, the bombs fall. Almost 20,000 cannonballs have crushed the city. And still Quebec will not surrender. On Ile d'Orléans, the British camp is confused and divided. It is commanded by a very sick man who spends whole days in bed, and even when he's well, he's indecisive. James Wolfe's relationship with his senior officers is poisonous. He ignores their advice, and they dismiss him as a mere career soldier from the middle class. One of his brigadiers is George Townsend, the son of a viscount. Townsend openly mocks his commander, drawing caricatures which he passes around the camp. To his wife, he writes a bitter letter.
I never served so disagreeable campaign as this. Our unequal force has reduced our operations to a scene of skirmishing, cruelty, and devastation. General Wolfe's health is but very bad. His generalship, in my poor opinion, is not much better.
The summer is half gone, and Wolfe can't decide where to attack. His senior officers believe Wolfe should outflank Quebec and land upriver. But suddenly, and without consulting his brigadiers, Wolfe orders a different invasion, not upriver, but here, at the Beauport shore, where Montcalm's army is securely entrenched. On the morning of Tuesday, July 31st, near the falls at Montmorency, Wolfe launches the invasion of Quebec. 4,000 British troops storm the beaches in front of the Beauport trenches. It's the same gamble Wolfe used at Louisbourg and won. But the French troops and the Canadian militia are ready for them. This time, Wolfe's gamble ends in disaster. The French have crushed the great British invasion. Vaudreuil is jubilant.
I have no more anxiety about Quebec. Monsieur Wolfe, I can assure you, will make no progress. His orders say that he will try us again in a few days. That's what we want. He'll find somebody to talk to.
Wolfe is humiliated and desperate. Now he opens the darkest chapter of his campaign, telling his officers, "I intend to burn the whole country from Kamouraska to the Point of Levis." If he can't capture Canada, he will destroy its harvests, its granaries, its food for the winter. The British range along the St. Lawrence for 100 miles. They lay waste to deserted villages and farms. The most zealous are men from the American colonies, bent on revenge for the burning of their own frontier settlements by the French and the Indians.
I've learned that on the South Shore, the English, as well as burning the parish of Saint-Antoine, have burned Saint-Nicolas and Sainte-Croix. On the Ile d'Orléans, the houses in the parish of Saint-François half the homes in Sainte-Famille, and as well those of Baie-Saint-Paul, and that they sent 600 men to the lower South Shore to burn the houses and wheat fields.
Lieutenant Malcolm Fraser of the 78th Highlanders was marching to Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré when his detachment was fired on by 200 Canadians and Indians. But he was more disturbed by what his own side did.
There were several of the enemy killed or wounded, and a few prisoners taken, all of whom the barbarous Captain Montgomery, who commanded us, ordered to be butchered in a most inhuman and cruel manner.
Wolfe is despondent. He knows that failure here means public disgrace in England. He writes a letter to his widowed mother, ending with a startling announcement.
I approve entirely of my father's disposition of his affairs, though perhaps it may interfere a little matter with my plan of quitting the service, which I am determined to do the first opportunity. I mean so as not to be absolutely distressed in circumstances, nor burdensome to you, or to anybody else.
Time has run out. With summer at an end, the Royal Navy must pull out all its ships in 2 weeks. Wolfe writes to the British cabinet.
I found myself so ill, and am still so weak, that I begged the general officers to consult together for the public utility. They are all of opinion to draw the enemy from their present situation and bring them to an action. I have acquiesced in their proposal, and we are preparing to put it into execution.
The generals decide that 5,000 men will invade 30 miles upriver, but at the last moment, rain delays the attack. While the invaders wait in their ships, Wolfe wanders off by himself, back toward Quebec, always examining the North Shore. No one can quite believe what he comes up with. Wolfe will gamble one more time. Thursday, September the 13th, 1759. A steep rock face rises 200 feet above the river. The only access to the top, a narrow goat path. James Wolfe has ordered all the landing craft to drift down the river, and the troops to scale this forbidding face to a field he has never walked. All night, the British Army climbs. O'clock in the morning, on the plains of Abraham. James Wolfe and his commanders survey the field. He has only seen the plains through a telescope 3 days ago. An abandoned farmer's field, uneven, filled with scrub. Wolfe has placed himself between two armies. On one side, Montcalm's main force is at Beauport, an hour's march away. But behind Wolfe, there is another French army, 2,000 men scattered along the St. Lawrence under Bougainville, who can mobilize within a few hours. Wolfe is gambling Montcalm will take the bait. If Wolfe can't tempt Montcalm into a quick battle here this morning, his position is militarily desperate. Montcalm quickly mobilizes, but he's uncertain about the British invasion plan. He sends 5,000 men towards the Plains of Abraham and leaves the rest of his force to guard the Beauport trenches. The Marquis de Vaudreuil sends a courier to Bougainville.
A 6:45, September 13th. To Monsieur de Bougainville. It seems quite certain that the enemy has attempted a landing. Monsieur le Marquis de Montcalm has just left. As soon as I am sure of what is happening, I will notify you. Postscriptum. The enemy forces seem considerable.
They are more than considerable. By 8 in the morning, 4,000 men are assembling on the Plains of Abraham. But the British are not alone. In the woods and cornfields around the plains, 400 Canadian militia and Indian snipers have rushed from Quebec to pin the enemy down while Montcalm's troops mobilize. They are the first to engage the invader. Lieutenant John Knox sees men falling around him.
What galled us the most was a body of Indians and other marksmen they had concealed in the corn opposite to the front of our right wing and a coppice that stood opposite to our center.
At 8:30, Montcalm's army is approaching the Plains of Abraham. But before this day, these men have already traveled thousands of miles with different motives. For the French officers, this is another encounter among many in the imperial wars of Europe. Colonel Etienne Guillaume de Saint-Nazaire, an aristocrat who's fought in Italy, Bavaria, and the Netherlands. This morning, it's Quebec. Captain Jean-Baptiste Duprat, a commoner who rose through the ranks, fought in Italy, Bavaria, and the Rhine. Fiacre François de Montbéliard, commander of the French artillery, veteran of the War of Austrian Succession. The soldiers they're leading are also thousands of miles from home, but they're here because they have little choice. Most are from the cities. They are the landless, the surplus labor of France. Carpenters, apprentice wig makers, cloth cutters. Men like Joseph Douzet, Antoine Moret, Barthélemy Gérard. Most had never even heard of Quebec before they were shipped here.
Wheeling to the right from column into line! Right wheel!
They're not much different from the men waiting for them in the British lines. The 35th Regiment is recruited largely from Ireland. Many are farmers displaced from their land. Michael Clinton, John Darby, Abel Skittle. Irishmen who have spent most of their time enforcing the British occupation of their own country. The English soldiers here are the jobless apprentices of Britain's clothing factories and shipyards. Others have a different story. the Fraser Highlanders. Their families were evicted from the Scottish Highlands by the British. The young men had no alternative but to join the very army which destroyed their way of life. James Thompson, John Fraser, Alexander Fraser. These men have nothing left to lose. Marching in the ranks of Montcalm's regiments, however, are hundreds of men who have everything to lose. Fathers and sons of the great Canadian families. D'Argenteuil, Courtemanche, Repentigny. Unlike the French soldiers, the Canadians are defending their homes and their way of life. François Clément Boucher de la Perrière. At 51, he feels his age. I can no longer see clearly now, he says, though I have glasses on my nose. Not far from him, the next generation of his family, René Aimable Boucher de Boucherville. The Bouchers are defending almost 150 years of family and history. Charles Deschamps de Boisbert spent 2 years protecting fleeing Acadians from the British. He leads the Acadian militia this morning. Under him, Joseph Trahan, 18, an Acadian who escaped the deportation. This morning, he's a refugee and a soldier at arms. The British Army now numbers 4,441 men. To increase their firepower, Wolfe has ordered them to load 2 lead balls in their muskets instead of 1. To stretch his army out over the widest possible distance, Wolfe orders his men to form in 2 long, thin lines rather than the usual 3. One of the first to arrive is the French artillery commander Montbéliard. He scans the plains below him. The British line is a mile wide. When Montcalm arrives, he's still uncertain. The British position seems so reckless. But he doesn't know if this is their full invasion force or if they will attempt a second landing at Beauport. He can attack, or he can wait for Bougainville to arrive with reinforcements. The fate of Quebec and of Canada rests with Montcalm's next decision. It is the morning of September the 13th, 1759. James Wolfe is desperate. He's placed his army in a precarious position, hoping the French will attack him. The Marquis de Montcalm is shaken and uncertain. Is this the real British invasion or a diversion? The battle for North America will unfold here, on an abandoned farmer's field, a mile from Quebec. It is 9:30. The real battle has not yet begun. For 30 minutes, the British artillery pummels the French line to create disorder while the army is still forming on the hill. Montcalm decides he will not wait for Bougainville's reinforcements. He will strike at the British this morning. He rides to his artillery commander, Montbéliard.
I spoke for a moment with Monsieur le Marquis de Montcalm, who told me we will not be able to avoid the battle. If we give them enough time to establish themselves, we will never be able to attack with the kind of army we have.
Montcalm orders a general advance. At approximately 10 o'clock, the Battle of the Plains of Abraham begins. It is a textbook maneuver. Montcalm's army will advance in a massive column. It will sweep down the hill and smash the thin red line. But the French line that started down the hill is uncoordinated, and after a short distance, the first mistake. Someone gives the order to halt the advance and fire.
Apprêtez vos armes! En joue!
The ragged volley is pointless. The British are far out of range. The French resume the advance, their lines more confused and disordered with every step. Wolfe's soldiers wait. When the French are within 40 yards of the British, they form for their second volley. This time they can see the faces of the men in the British line. French reload, the British take position to fire. Finally, in the smoke and confusion, James Wolfe issues the most important military command of his life. The British volley is devastating. A mile-wide burst of concentrated fire. The French line is dazed, but stands its ground. Then the Highlanders unleash an advance with broadswords that can slice a man in half. Joseph Trahan of the Acadian militia is right in front of them.
I can remember the Scotch Highlanders flying wildly after us, with streaming plaids, bonnets, and large swords, like so many infuriated demons.
British bayonets draws closer. Confusion finally crumbles the French line. Battle of the Plains of Abraham has lasted barely 15 minutes. Sometime just after the British volley, James Wolfe is struck by a fatal shot in the chest. At the crest of the hill, Montcalm is engulfed in a stream of retreating men. Sometime in the next few moments, he is struck by a musket ball below his ribs. Most of the French flee up the hill towards the walls of Quebec. With them, Joseph Trahan.
I was amongst the fugitives and received in the calf of the leg a spent bullet, which stretched me on the ground. I thought it was all over for me, but presently I rose up and continued to run.
The British are within reach of the gates of Quebec, with the Highlanders leading the charge. Until they are stunned by a barrage of fire from the surrounding woods and fields. Hundreds of Canadian militia and Indians cover the retreating French army. The first wounded are brought to the General Hospital and to Marie de la Visitation.
We were in the midst of the dead, the dying, which were brought to us by hundreds. Many of them are friends, are relations. It was necessary to smother our grief and extend ourselves to relieve them.
Even though the French vastly outnumber the British, Vaudreuil has decided they will not fight again the next day. He orders the soldiers to abandon Quebec and Beauport. Some of the citizens stone them and shout, "Cowards!" The battlefield is left now to the dead and the dying. Colonel Etienne Guillaume de Saint-Nazaire, mortally wounded, will die the next day. François Clément Boucher de la Perrière, who fought today with his eyes failing him, will die by evening. James Wolfe lived only a few minutes, long enough to hear that he had defeated the French. His body will be sent back to England, where he will be the Empire's newest hero. He was 32 years old. Louis-Joseph, the Marquis de Montcalm, will survive for one more day. His body is put in a makeshift box because there are no coffins left, and buried in a hole made by a British cannonball. He was 47 years old. "1,300 men were killed or wounded on the Plains of Abraham. The Canadians from the parishes and cities of New France, the youths of the English Midlands, the dispossessed of the Scottish Highlands, the unemployed from Normandy and Provence. All will be buried, French and English together, in large common pits on the plains. The location of their graves will never be marked. "10 days after the battle, the French artillery commander Montcalm makes an entry in his journal.
20 times I have picked up my pen, and 20 times sorrow has made it fall from my hands. How can I bring to mind such overwhelming events? We were saved, and now we are lost.
The news of the British victory reaches London a month later. The streets are filled with celebration. Writer Horace Walpole hasn't been to bed for 3 days.
It is still all gold. One would think we had plundered east and west of sunshine. Our bells are worn threadbare with ringing for victories.
In Versailles, Madame de Pompadour sees the fall of Quebec as one less problem for Louis XV. At last, she says, the king can get some rest. The British fleet leaves the fortress of Quebec and the British garrison to its sobering conquest and the November winds. Benoit Francois Bernier had been commissioner of war in Quebec. Now he is a prisoner of war.
Quebec is nothing but a shapeless mass of ruins. Confusion, disorder, pillaging reign even among the inhabitants. Everyone searches for his property, and not finding it, seizes that of other people. For English and French alike, all is chaos.
The Bishop of Quebec sees his people burning little fires of survival in shattered streets.
The inhabitants of the town are without wood for the winter, without bread, without flour, without meat. They survive only on a few biscuits and on the salt pork which the English soldiers sell them from their rations.
But soon, the British are as hungry and desperate as the people. The conquerors and the conquered are hostage to each other. General James Murray, the military governor of Quebec, has to cope with growing civil disorder.
Executed an inhabitant, heretofore a drummer with the French service, for having incited one of our soldiers to desert. At the same moment, a soldier of the 48th tried and convicted this day of robbing a French inhabitant. The instant it was reported, the sentence was put into execution.
Both the Canadians and the British know they share an imminent destiny, the Canadian winter. But in Montreal, it will be a winter of rebuilding. The defeated French army is preparing to fight once more. Jean-Baptiste Duprat, veteran of the Plains of Abraham, is making the Canadian militia a central part of the renewed army. The general who has replaced Montcalm is François Gaston de Lévis. He is determined to retake Quebec and pleads for reinforcements from France.
If the king decides not to give us any help, I must warn you that you will no longer be able to count on us at the end of May. we will be obliged to surrender out of misery since we are lacking everything.
In Quebec, John Knox sees a British garrison less concerned with training than surviving.
December 16th to the 21st. Our guards on the Grand Parade make a most grotesque appearance in their different dresses. The uniformity and the nicety of the clean, methodical soldier was not to be found in the rough, fur-wrought garb of the frozen Laplander.
And the garrison has another enemy. Malcolm Fraser of the Highlanders keeps a grim chronicle.
The scurvy, occasioned by salt provisions and cold, has begun to make fierce havoc in the garrison, and it becomes every day more general. Numbers of sick and dead since September 18, 1759. Sick, 2,312. Dead, 682.
The winter of 1760 finally wanes, and the St. Lawrence comes to life. General Lévis is convinced France will save Canada, and he wants to be in Quebec when the French Navy sails up the river. One afternoon in late April, a violent thunderstorm breaks over Quebec. It lasts all that day and throughout the night. Marie de la Visitation sees a portent of things to come.
The heavens seem to be contending against us. The thunder, the lightning, very rare during this season, seem to be a forerunner of the shock to which our troops would be exposed.
4,000 of Lévis' soldiers are approaching Quebec, determined to retake the city. What follows will be one of the most remarkable reversals of fortune in Canadian history.
On the 28th of April, 1760, about 8 o'clock in the morning, the whole garrison was drawn up on the parade. About 9 o'clock, we marched out of town with 20 pieces of artillery.
Marched to the very spot where Montcalm had stood on the plains of Abraham. Like Montcalm, General James Murray advances down the hill toward the enemy. Within minutes, his cannon bogged down in the wet snow. For 2 hours, there is brutal, intense, and often hand-to-hand fighting on the plains. A nearby windmill changes hands 5 times. Turns in favor of the French. But Jean-Baptiste Duprat, the man who helped transform the Canadian militia, will never know of his army's success. The verdict of the Plains of Abraham, with the same armies on the same field, has been reversed. the British fall back on Quebec.
The intrepidity and the valor of the Canadians and of the French drove the enemy from their strong position. We remained masters of the field, of the cannon, and took many prisoners. The enemy retreated within the walls and dared not venture forth again.
For Canadians, there is new hope that Canada can be regained. Everyone knows France and Britain are sending reinforcements, but no one knows which will arrive first. Lévis surrounds Quebec and waits.
In these unfortunate circumstances, I am obliged to delay maneuvers and play for time while we are waiting to receive assistance that could come from France. If we do receive cannons and munitions, we could soon take the town.
"11 days later, a ship of war appears. It flies no flag. Finally, HMS Lowestoft reveals her colors.
The gladness of our troops is not to be expressed. Both officers and soldiers mounted the parapets in the face of the enemy and huzzaed with their hats in the air for nearly an hour.
Lévis had no choice but to retreat to Montreal. And it is here, 6 months later, that the end finally comes. 3 British armies, totaling 17,000 men, have converged on Montreal and surround Lévis.
And wanting to spare the troops part of the humiliation they were about to suffer, I ordered them to burn their flags, so they could escape the difficult task of handing them over to the enemy.
As the symbols of Canada's past burn, Governor Vaudreuil negotiates Canada's future. Before surrendering to the British commander, he obtains an extraordinary and enduring concession.
The free exercise of the Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman religion shall subsist entire, in such manner that all the states and the people of the towns and countries, places, and distant posts shall continue to assemble in the churches and to frequent the sacraments as heretofore, without being molested in any manner, directly or indirectly.
The unthinkable has happened. An English Protestant king receives 65,000 French Catholic subjects. Canada capitulates to the British at 8 o'clock the next morning, the 8th of September, 1760. With one scratch of a pen, half the continent changes hands. In the American colonies, there is mass jubilation. For Benjamin Franklin, the future is clear and bright.
No one can rejoice more sincerely than I do on the reduction of Canada. If we keep Canada, all the country from the St. Lawrence to the Mississippi will, in another century, be filled with British people.
Benjamin Franklin thinks the battle for the continent is won, but remarkable events will prove him wrong. A turbulent decade will lay the foundations of a new country. Men hungry for power will poison the peace, only to be confronted by an extraordinary alliance. In the interior, the Indian nations will rise against the conquerors. The British have won, but the peace will be harder than the war. At Fort Michilimackinac, by Lake Superior, the Ojibwe chief Minavavana issues a warning to a group of English traders.
Englishmen, although you have conquered the French, you have not yet conquered us. We are not your slaves. These lakes, these woods and mountains were left us by our ancestors. Englishmen, your king has not sent us any presents, nor entered into any treaty with us. Therefore, he and we are still at war.
The war fever builds. Since the conquest, the English have gone far beyond the Ohio Valley and into the Great Lakes area, occupying all the French forts, pouring ever deeper into the interior. Pontiac is a war chief of the Ottawa Nation. He calls for total annihilation of the English.
It is important for us, my brothers, that we exterminate from our lands this nation which seeks only to destroy us. You see as well as I that we can no longer supply our needs as we have done from our brothers, the French. The English sell us goods twice as dear as the French do. When I ask the English commander anything for our sick, he refuses with the reply that he has no use for us. You can see as well as I that they are seeking our ruin.
All the British frontier forts are surrounded. Michilimackinac, Ouiatenon, Pitt, St. Joseph, Edward Augustus, Niagara, and the biggest of all, Detroit. For 5 weeks, Pontiac's war bands massacre settlers and hold the interior in terror. But the British conceive their own cruelty. A British officer writes to his commander with a plan.
I will try to inoculate the Indians by means of blankets that may fall into their hands, taking care, however, not to get the disease myself. It is a pity to oppose good men against them.
The blankets are infected with smallpox. Fragments are inserted into silver boxes by soldiers immune to the virus. The British are using germ warfare. The boxes are given to a delegation of Ottawa Indians at Fort Pitt. They are told they contain medicine, which should not be opened till they return home. All summer, Pontiac has heard rumors of a peace between France and Britain. He is finally convinced the rumors are fact and sends a message to the commander of Fort Detroit.
My brother, the word from my father, the King of France, to make peace, I accept. All my young men have buried their hatchets. I know you can forget the bad things that have happened this past while. For my part, I shall forget, which you can show me how to do, in order to think only of good things.
The war parties return to their tribal lands. Some carry the little silver boxes. Andrew Blackbird, the adopted son of an Ottawa chief, described what happened.
Accordingly, after they reached home, they opened the box. Pretty soon burst a terrible sickness. The tradition says it was indeed awful and terrible. Lodge after lodge was totally vacated. Nothing but dead bodies lying here and there in their lodges. The whole coast of Arbor-Croche, which is said to have been a continuous village some 15 or 16 miles long, was entirely depopulated and laid waste.
The British commander wrote later that by sending germs instead of British soldiers, he had saved the lives of better men. But while these people are dying, history is taking a fateful turn. The British government is looking for lasting peace on the frontier. It decides to recognize the North American interior as Indian land. Britain issues a royal proclamation. Indian land will be protected by the king. There will be no encroachment by American settlers and speculators.
We do hereby strictly forbid, on pain of our displeasure, all our loving subjects from making any purchases or settlements whatever, or taking any possession of any of the lands above reserved without our especial leave and license.
The proclamation will stir the American colonies to political fury, and its legacy will shape the continent for centuries to come. The 7 Years' War doesn't end until 3 years after the conquest of Canada. In the peace negotiations, entire lands are bartered. One of the dilemmas: who will take Canada? Or rather, is Canada worth taking? Many Englishmen argue that a more valuable prize lies in the Caribbean. The tiny island of Guadeloupe, captured from the French, produces sugar worth twice as much as all of Canada's furs. Finally, the choice is made by France's delegate at the peace talks, the Duc de Choiseul.
The king cedes and guarantees to the King of England, without restriction, Canada as it was possessed, or deemed to be possessed, by France.
France prefers to get Guadeloupe back, leaving Canada to Britain. But there is one Canadian asset France does want: the right to fish in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, along with 2 tiny islands off the Newfoundland coast. The only part of Canada France wants is the fish. The British aren't sure what to do with a colony of French Catholics, But Benjamin Franklin reassures London the Canadians will not be a problem for long.
Many will choose to remove if they can be allowed to sell their lands, improvements and effects. The rest in that thin settled country will, within half a century, be blended and incorporated with our people in both language and manners.
The new British governor is a general who spent 2 years of his life invading, bombarding, and occupying Quebec. But James Murray's biggest challenge will be governing the peace, and he will find an improbable ally. Jean-Olivier Briand is a quiet, private man who has now inherited the leadership of Canada's Catholics. He must ensure the Church's survival. He orders his parishes to accept the new king.
The God of armies, who extends or restricts at his pleasure the boundaries of empires, having by his eternal decrees put us under the domination of his Britannic Majesty, it is our duty, based on natural law, to be interested in all that concerns him. We order you to submit to the king and to all those who share his authority.
Years ago, Briand tended the French wounded on the battlefields of Quebec, while Murray commanded the British forces there. Now the two men form an alliance that will grow into a lifetime friendship.
Monsieur Briand has constantly acted with a candor, moderation, and disinterestedness which bespeak him a worthy, honest man, and I know of none of his gown in the province so justly deserving of the royal favor.
But a crisis is building for James Murray in an unlikely quarter. English merchants from Boston and London have been moving into Canada, eager to profit from the conquest.
All have their fortunes to make, and I hear that few of them are solicitous about the means where the end can be obtained. In general, the most immoral collection of men I ever knew.
The most hated of all is Thomas Walker of Boston. In 2 short years, he has alienated everyone, even the British Army. English soldiers go so far as to slice off his ear and toss it on the table, saying, "This is for supper."
I therefore stay at home, and never stir out of town without 2 or 3 friends, each armed with a sword and pistols. I am never out of my own house after dark, and in going about any ordinary business, always carry a brace of loaded pistols in my pocket and a sword by my side.
Walker and the English merchants want to control everything in the new regime, including the justice system. They insist that all juries be picked only from the Protestant English, even if there are only 200 of them. But Governor Murray surprises everyone. He sides with the Catholic Canadians.
As there are but 200 Protestant subjects in the province, it is thought unjust to exclude the new Roman Catholic subjects to sit upon juries, as such an exclusion would constitute the said 200 Protestants perpetual judges of the lives and property of not only the 80,000 new subjects, but likewise of all the military in the province.
The English merchants are enraged and complain to the king.
We believe that the admitting of persons of the Roman religion as jurors is an open violation of our most sacred laws and liberties, and tending to the utter subversion of the Protestant religion, and to His Majesty's power, authority, right, and possession of the province to which we belong.
The Canadians fight back. 94 prominent citizens sign a counter-petition. One of them is the merchant Pierre Guy.
Who are those who wish to have us proscribed? About 30 English merchants, of whom 15 at the most are settled here. Who are the proscribed? 10,000 heads of families who feel nothing but submission to the order of your majesty.
Canadian merchants also worry about economic ruin. In the Quebec warehouse of François Baby, business is not going well.
Business is advancing very slowly in this country. Money is rarer than ever, and bad fate is everywhere.
And the English merchants are advancing new demands. They want an elected assembly, one in which only they can sit, since Catholics are barred from holding office in the British Empire. Murray urges London to resist all the merchants' demands.
Little, very little, will content the new subjects. But nothing will satisfy the licentious fanatics trading here but the expulsion of the Canadians, who are perhaps the bravest and best race upon the globe. A race who indulge with a few privileges that the laws of England deny to Roman Catholics at home, would soon get the better of every national antipathy to the conquerors, and become the most faithful and the most useful set of men in this American empire.
Thomas Walker sails to London to fight for Protestant juries, a Protestant assembly, and the removal of Governor Murray. He loses on all counts but one. James Murray is recalled. Murray writes to his old Roman Catholic ally, Jean-Olivier Briand, who has just been anointed Bishop of Quebec.
I have ardently wished to take your hand and sincerely congratulate you and your promotion, an event which has made me very happy, as I have done all in my power to contribute to it. My Canadiens, I recommend to your care. They have behaved so as to fix my affection for them forever.
James Murray will never see Canada again. His departure is a triumph for the English merchants, but they have yet to meet the new governor. General Sir Guy Carleton is 42. He is distant, reserved, and has been in the British Army since the age of 14. And he's been here before. He was wounded at the Plains of Abraham 7 years ago. The English merchants believe this governor will favor their cause, but Carleton has a surprise for them.
Barring catastrophe shocking to think of, this country must, to the end of time, be peopled by the Canadian race, who have already taken such firm root and got to so great height that any new stock transplanted will be totally hid and imperceptible among them.
He believes that Catholics should be able to hold office, that French civil law should be restored to the Canadians. Carleton also has very practical strategic reasons for placating the Canadians. To the south, there is growing restlessness among the American colonies. Carleton fears the Americans will rise in revolution and that France will support them.
Should France begin a war in hopes that the British colonies will push matters to extremities, and she adopt the project of supporting them in their independent notions, Canada probably will then become the principal scene where the fate of America may be determined.
Carleton sails to London, determined to be the architect of an enduring peace in Canada. But he finds London is more concerned with its American colonies. in Boston, crates of tea are dumped in the harbor to protest new taxes. To retaliate, Britain shuts down the port. It abolishes elections in the colonies and passes coercive laws, denounced as the Intolerable Acts. Carleton has now been in London for 4 years, warning that the tensions in Canada must be resolved. And he is not alone. A Canadian arrives from Quebec with a dramatic intervention. François Babby fought with distinction against the British invaders of Canada. Now he is in London bearing a petition from the most prominent Canadian families, supporting Carleton.
Dissipate these fears and this uneasiness by restoring to us our ancient laws and customs, and to extend our province to its former boundaries. Grant us, in common with your other subjects, the rights and privileges of citizens of England. Then our fears will be removed, and we shall pass our lives in tranquility and happiness, and we shall be ready to sacrifice them for the glory of our prince and the good of our country.
The Quebec Act passes the House of Commons in the spring of 1774. It restores to Canada all the interior lands which the Americans are claiming. It guarantees the Canadians their religion and restores French civil law. The Catholic Canadians are allowed to hold public office. The accommodation established here between French and English will become a cornerstone of the next 200 years of Canadian history. But in the American colonies, history will record this differently. The Quebec Act is the final, intolerable act. The dream of an English-American empire embracing the entire continent is blocked. The New York Journal expresses the outrage.
The finger of God points out a mighty empire to our sons. The savages of the wilderness were never expelled to make room in this, the best part of the continent, for idolaters and slaves.
It appears to be the greatest stake that was ever played for. No less whether Americans in their endless generations might enjoy the common rights of all mankind or be worse than Eastern slaves. The trial must now come to issue as open war is declared by the Boston Port Act and, above all, the Quebec Bill.
Open war with Britain comes 6 months later, on April the 19th, 1775, at Lexington. The American colonies slide into a chaotic revolution. Now Canada will have to fight for its very existence.